Good morning, students. I'm Brian, and this is the English of Life. One of the greatest challenges in learning a new language is learning the difference between similar words. Two such similar words is the topic of today's lesson. What is the difference between sympathy and empathy? You're about to learn. Let's get started. Sympathy. If you have sympathy for someone, it means that you feel sorry for them, feel pity, feel sorrow or sadness because of some misfortune they are experiencing in their life. This 10-year-old girl has just lost her parents. They died in a car accident. You can't imagine how she is feeling since your parents are still with you, but you know she must be feeling terrible grief. You have sympathy for her. You feel sad for her. It breaks your heart to think about her misfortune. How terrible, you think. You want to do something to help her feel better because you are compassionate. You have compassion. Compassion is a feeling of deep sympathy and sorrow for another who is stricken by misfortune, occupied by a strong desire to alleviate the suffering. People feel sympathy for others, of course, when something terrible happens to them, such as losing a loved one, a death in the family, or even for something small, like when a child drops their ice cream cone. Whenever someone suffers, we feel sympathy for them. The amount of sympathy we have is usually due to how compassionate we are. Are you a sympathetic person? If you laughed when you saw the picture to the right, well then maybe. Other adjectives related to sympathetic are kind, loving, warm-hearted, thoughtful, sensitive, supportive. The opposite of sympathetic is indifferent, insensitive, uncaring, cold-hearted, mean, and unfeeling. To have empathy means to feel their pain and suffering as if it was your own. In order to truly understand someone's suffering, you yourself must have had the same or similar experience in your life, and what's more, be willing to relive that feeling again. If you were in my shoes, how would you feel? This is what it means to be empathetic. Walk a mile in my shoes, see what I see, hear what I hear, feel what I feel. Then maybe you'll understand why I do what I do. Till then, don't judge me. Here is an example. Frank is John's father. John fell down the stairs and broke his back in a terrible accident. John is unable to feel or use his legs now and is confined to a wheelchair. Frank loves his son very much and has great sympathy for him. He would trade places with him if he could. John knows his father loves him and means well, but his sympathy does very little to help him. He feels that Frank doesn't really understand how he feels and can't help him to feel better about his situation. This is why people often say, "I don't want your sympathy." Professor X, on the other hand, does know exactly what it is like to live in a wheelchair, and therefore is capable of having empathy for John. Sympathy is a feeling of pity or sense of compassion. It's when you feel bad for someone else who's going through something hard. He shows little sympathy with the complaints of foreign businesses about the difficulties they face in China. Sympathies is the plural. When speaking about more than one person's sympathy, use the plural form. Jack and Jill expressed their sympathies for Bill, who fell down a hill and broke his cell phone. "We're so sorry, Bill," they said. Mr. Trump repeated his sympathies on Tuesday at the White House meeting. Sympathize, the verb. When you sympathize, you care about how someone else feels during a time of trouble. I sympathize with the problems of the protesters who want a better standard of living, jobs, and a less economic hardship, she said. Sympathetic, the adjective. A sympathetic person is one who is motivated by compassion. Ultimately, they both attended a sympathetic school after a teacher intervened. Unsympathetic, the adjective. If you are unsympathetic, you don't care about someone's difficulties. When our enemies suffer, we are often unsympathetic. My logic probably sounds unsympathetic, but I'm not. Sympathetically, the adverb. When you are doing something because you feel sympathy, you are doing it sympathetically. She sympathetically hugged the grieving child. Mr. Kahane's songs sympathetically recount stories people told him about their lives, but also face grim historical memories. Unsympathetically. Use this adverb to describe the action that shows no sympathy for another. My neighbor came to complain about my dog barking, and I unsympathetically slammed the door in his face. Because he often has loud parties late at night, I don't feel any sympathy for him. Mrs. Bridge is portrayed, not unsympathetically, as unimaginative, unthinking, and continually stupefied. Sympathizer. Someone who's on your side, who supports you wholeheartedly, is your sympathizer. Islamic State sympathizers argue that those arrests served only Israel. Use empathy if you're looking for a noun meaning the ability to identify with another's feelings. This lacked empathy and does not reflect our policies or the way Just Eat would expect something like this to be dealt with. Empathetic, the adjective. An empathetic person is someone who can share another person's feelings. If you tell an empathetic person that your heart is broken, she might touch her own heart and gaze at you sadly through moist eyes. I think I'm very empathetic towards other people's experiences, Brady said. Empathize, the verb. To empathize is to understand or relate to someone else's emotional experience. This method of mirroring helped the children look at the consequences of their actions and practice empathizing with others. Empathetically, the adjective. When we need a confidant, we usually want the person to do one thing, to listen empathetically.
At the time this video was recorded, Teacher Brian had only 24 subscribers on YouTube. The only likes he had received came from himself and his family. After more than 6 months of hard work, nobody was watching his lessons. Nobody had donated even $2 to his Patreon account. Nobody had signed up to study English using the supernatural English study method. It seemed that nobody was sympathetic to his need for money to take care of his family. But then he remembered that he was on a mission to give English students all over the world a clear path to English mastery. He was passionate once again, determined to help those poor English students. He had great sympathy for the frustrations his students had, making slow and painful progress using traditional English study methods. If he didn't help them, nobody would. With newfound determination, he began excitedly writing his next lesson.